Yes. Okay. So should I
Now,
proceed?
yes, you may proceed. Thank you so much.
Oh, so sorry for this delay, colleagues. I'm really sorry about this. I mean, this is not a good way to to send, a positive message about resilience. Um, but anyway, thank you so much again for providing us this opportunity. On behalf of the African Development Bank, I'm so pleased today to represent the bank and speak to its approach to addressing fragility and building resilience. I see that you are moving fast with my slides, so I really appreciate if you can go back to the yes, second slide is okay. So I'm happy to report. I'll try to be very brief, bearing in mind the fact that we've been lagging behind time because of these technical glitches. So I'll just really focus on the main message of this presentation. I'm happy first to report that the bank, last week, the boards of directors of the bank have approved the third strategy of the bank for addressing fragility and building resilience. And this is the new strategy, which is will cover the 2022-2026 period. So having said that, as you can see on this slide, I'll try to be very brief. So the building on the evolving picture of Africa landscape, we understand in the African Development Bank the need to update our definition of the concept of fragility. And our old strategy, the 2014 strategy, defined fragility as a condition of elevated risk of institutional breakdown, societal conflict. And we trust, as we started the development of a new strategy, that we should move away from these extreme concepts of institutional breakdown, societal collapse and violent conflict, in favor of a definition of fragility that has broad application across diverse African contexts. So in this context, we suggested redefining fragility, as you can see in the narrative in the left side of the screen, as the risk that internal or external pressure may exceed existing capacities to prevent, respond to, and recover from those pressure. And this is very important for us to understand what is the concept of fragility. But most importantly, what we really need, as the ambition is of course addressing fragility, but also, and most importantly, building a resilience. So we need also to understand what is sitting behind the concept of resilience. And beyond the intellectual exercise, this is a crucial also for us to help define the long-term objective of the strategy and concretely measure the impact of its implementation on the ground. So this is why, we went through this, this process of redefining resilience. And as we speak, we define it as attributes that enable countries to cope with, adapt to, and recover from shocks and stresses, and that reduce their vulnerability in the future. So resilience is, for us, really linked both to institutional capacity and the wider political, societal, economic, and environmental structure and systems. So alongside this working definition of resilience, our experience also suggests in the bank that fragility is a spectrum. It entails several situations that do not necessarily take place in a linear manner. So we broadly identified 4 distinct situations along this fragility spectrum. These are very indicative, but the most important message here is that each situation calls for a different form of support and engagement. And as you can see it on the right side of this screen, these include, increasing risks of conflict or collapse of state functions, active conflict and prolonged, crisis, signs of turnaround to rebuild and to reform, And fourth, decreasing risk and emerging pathways to resilience. So this differentiated paradigm assumes that at any moment, at any point of the spectrum, country can leverage opportunities to exit from fragility and build a sustainable pathways for building long-term resilience. So if we move to the next slide, you will see that, as a way of background, we wanted to better understand what are the drivers of fragility, what are the emerging trends when it comes to better understanding fragility and its drivers. But clearly, this is a very complex, and multidimensional issue. And countries that have experienced long-running fragility face higher poverty and food insecurity, wide gaps in infrastructure and public services, low economic diversity, mismanagement of natural resources, and deep institutional deficit. And these, they are vulnerable also to multiple crises, including external economic shocks, health outbreak, and climate change. So from this socioeconomic perspective, where pressure exceeds the ability of national institutions to manage them, countries might descend into political instability and conflict. And this is, we have, unfortunately, many examples as we speak today. Look what is happening in the Sahel region, the Lake Chad Basin, in different other rural and cross-border areas, the effect of climate change, the competition over, control and access to land, to forest products, to water, to mineral resources, etc., etc. And the overarching thing is that youth and young people and girls are often among the most and the worst affected, unfortunately. Women are particularly vulnerable to displacement, loss of livelihoods, land dispossession, disturbed access to public services, and domestic and even sexual violence. And, unfortunately, in Africa, we witnessed over the last few years a huge number of forced displacement and refugee people. I think around 32 million in 2021 has been reached as, people displaced and internally displaced and refugees. So these examples really highlight the need to build regional stability through effective conflict resolution, especially at the community level. And speaking to the, to these issues, that also underscore the need to support national capacity to manage also some pending issues and some critical issues such as debt. In response to the threat of conflict, many African governments have increased their expenditure on security. And that has diverted a lot of resources away from development agenda and putting an important pressure on their budgetary balance. Examples, for instance, in the military spending in the G5 Sahel countries reached an annual average of 1.3 billion between 2014 and 2019. This is, 2.5 times the level of the 1990s till the 2013, around 2013. So this is a story which we should really take care of. The fiscal pressure also, implemented in response to the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a deterioration in budgetary balance and debt levels. So this is also another, aspect that really we should take care of. So debt to GDP, for instance, for the continent was at 60% in 2019, while it has reached almost 75% by the end of 2021. And that creates, new forms of vulnerability while reducing also the fiscal space for investments. So if you go to the next slide, within this mix of complex interplay of fragility, everything is not so bad. We trust that we still have, hanging opportunities for building resilience in Africa, and this continent is full of, opportunities for resilience. So, for instance, the wide, consensus around the African Union Agenda 2063. It reflects on the serious commitment of African policymakers to improve economic and social inclusion. In times of conflict and crisis, we have seen national and regional bodies are increasingly demonstrating and their strong engagement for dialogue and mediation to restore peace and stability. And this forum is one of the good examples that demonstrate that. A certain level of regional solidarity also emerged in response to the COVID-19, when a number of governments committed to exchange healthcare workers and coordinated national efforts to procure medical supplies. Through well-regulated also trade liberalization, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area can further open a larger space for private investments. And innovations needed to unlock manufacturing, facilitate industrialization, and reduce market fragmentation in the continent. So the emergence also of a middle income class. This constitutes a pool of demanding human capital for consumer goods and quality public service. In turn, this contributes to harnessing the development of an educational, political, and economic agendas. So this is where the promising trajectory of several African economies need to further leverage economic diversification and ensure that lower income citizens can access decent jobs and enhancing living conditions. So I will not go through the detail, but within this optimism and that the strategic vision of the African Development Bank is really grounded firmly in its comparative advantage as a unique position in Africa's development architecture. And if we move to the next slide, you will see that we try to represent, to summarize, since 2001, the bank has led the fragility agenda in Africa for the past 2 decades. It became one of the very first multilateral bank to institutionalize the concept of fragility into its operations, processes, and instruments. And this 2 decades of engagements is grounded in 2 successive strategic frameworks, the 2008 strategy and the 2014 strategy. And now we are talking about the 3rd strategy of the bank. And during this experience, the bank has really increased its capacity to engage in the space and to make sure that it is really the bank is staying engaged on these issues. So, for example, with also the what we call the CRFA, the Country Resilience and Fragility Assessments, the bank has established a strong conceptual framework for understanding fragility and resilience in Africa. And the bank also offers strong relationship with African countries, regional economic communities, the African Union, and other institutions to build over many years. The bank is able to use its convening power to lead policy dialogue, advocacy, and to broker partnership to facilitate joint initiatives. So these are, some examples that really shows the bank commitment, its long-standing, engagement in the space, and this is where we are coming from. And these are the building blocks, that the foundations that really helped the development of this new strategy. So moving to the next slide, the purpose of this strategy is really to reinvigorate and scale up the bank engagement of fragility in Africa, while we want to shift to a preventative approach that builds resilience against the diverse shock and pressure to which African regions, countries, and communities are unfortunately vulnerable. The objective of the strategy is to increase resilience across African regions, countries, and communities. And to achieve these objectives, the strategy defines 3 interconnected and mutually reinforcing priorities. You have priority 1, which is about strengthening institutional capacity, priority 2, which is about building resilient society, and priority 3, which is about catalyzing private investments. For the sake of time, I will not go through the detail of every single priorities, but let me just focus on the 3rd priority, which in our view, this is something that we really look at it as, I see that the remaining time is 1 minute. Is it okay? Hello, anyone can hear me? Can I continue beyond 1 minute?
So unfortunately, we only have this minute left because we have to go into the session.
Okay. So let me leave priority number 3 and move to the next slide. I think it's important also to highlight that, you know, this strategic direction is really grounded on the preventative approach, the regional approach, the private sector, and also the community-based approach. A theory of change has been produced to underpin this concept. It contains activities and outcomes that will materialize the operationalization of the strategy. And the operationalization of the strategy is really crucial, a crucial aspects of it. This is why the strategy, we'll discuss this later on, come with an action plan. So thank you for this. I can stop here, and we can continue the discussion during the Q&A if there are need to clarify some aspects.
Perfect. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in on the Q&A, but let's just have a look at the chat portion as well. If you can check on the side of your screen on the right-hand side, there's the chat facility there. So if anybody does have some questions, I don't see any coming up on there. But thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you. You're welcome. And again, I'm really, really sorry about these technical glitches. Next time we'll do that.
It happens, and thank you to everyone for your patience during these technical glitches. We are now going to move on to the main room, where there will be a short announcement and then a networking session. So please make your way through to that room, and we will see you there for some networking. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks.